Good morning to everyone. It's a beautiful morning in most spots of the state here, and really signaling the change. And one of the themes we're going to talk about this morning is what a difference a week makes, certainly in terms of humidity and temperature, because we're looking at a relatively cool and dry forecast. That's the take home here, at least for the next week and maybe longer than that. If we look at the last week here, though. It really depended on where you are in the state. There was a weather system across the upper Midwest that was just almost painfully slow in terms of its movement. And you can see some of the results of that in terms of the mean temperatures for the last week. To the south and to the east of that system, no question, much warmer than normal temperatures here, very humid, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But to the north and west of the system, across especially central and western upper Michigan here, you can see the temperature departures actually in some cases were negative. But one more thing too about the south, especially as you get down into southern lower Michigan here, some cases our mean temperatures for the week were 4, 5, 6 degrees Fahrenheit, significantly warmer than normal. But it's also, this is probably makes sense, but much of that departure came at night. We had unusually warm or mild minimum temperatures during the last week, and there's one really important physical reason for that, and that's the humidity. I'll get to that in a moment. Precip wise, in some areas we did very well with precipitation. On the right hand side here, the yellows, 2 inches or more for the week. In some cases we had better than 3 inches. You can see over much of the southeastern lower, widespread, more than 2 inches. Also another area in northwestern lower Michigan. And that one is especially important because that was an area, certainly that has been drier and had issues with lack of water. But most of the state here, you can see solid 1/2 to 1 inch totals. A little bit less in some spots, the central lower, again, that's another area, of course, we've been watching carefully, but many areas did pick up significant precip during the week. Which brings me to the raw material of precip, and of course, that's water vapor. And looking at our humidity, there's a lot on this, but I just wanted to talk about last week because, again, if it seemed unusually muggy, uncomfortable, it was because it was truly very humid here. And I've used the period here, the 3rd through the 8th. That was really the core of this. But that's when that weather system I mentioned earlier that set up over the upper Midwest essentially just stalled and very slowly edged through the region. On the upper right-hand side here, these are dew point temperatures. And what are dew point? Dew point temperature is another way of telling how much water vapor is in the air, how much water vapor is physically there. It doesn't have to do with the air temperature, but it is just physically how much water vapor is there. The higher the dew point temperature, the more the water vapor. And what you can see here is that this big synoptic pattern over the Midwest, you can clearly see that with dew points over much of central and southern lower Michigan in excess of 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, what does that mean? It means it was really humid, very uncomfortable. Anytime the dew point temperature goes above 70, we as humans are really going to feel discomfort because the way we cool down, of course, is sweat and perspiration and the evaporation of that and the consumption of energy. The more the water vapor that's out there, the slower that takes place. So that's why we feel uncomfortable. But the other thing is, from a climatological note, we just don't see 70-degree dew points here in our part of the world in the upper Midwest that often. It's not common to see. And last week here on the right-hand side here, this is a meteogram taken from one of the environmental weather sites on campus at the Trevor Nichols Research Research Center here on campus at College and Mount Hope Roads. And on the top here in red, the air temperatures are in the red, and you can easily see, this is again the 3rd through the 8th, you can see the diurnal cycle. But below that, in this brown color that I've got with the cursor, that's the dew point temperature. And again, we don't see 70-degree dew point temperatures very often, but we did here for almost a solid 6 days. and you can see that the air temperature, it does move up during the day as the sun's out and things heat up and then moves down. And remember too that the dew point temperature serves as a little bit of a break on how far the air temperature can cool at night, because once the air temperature goes down to the dew point temperature, we get condensation and release of more heat, and that slows down the cooling. So the dew point temperature acts as a little bit of a floor on how far the air temperature falls at night. So that's a major reason why I said the temperatures were 6 degrees above normal. A lot of it was night. That's the reason. But again, as you look at this graphic here and look at this, again, a solid 6-day period where we're at 70 degrees, that's just something we don't see very often. Below that, we have relative humidity in red. And then the blue-green color, that's when the leaf wetness sensor is on. And you can probably imagine, well, part of it was very, very uncomfortable in terms of people. But the other issue is here that we had extended leaf wetting events on a daily basis. You can see that happen here. Many of them were at least 12 hours long, which is also unusual. Climatologically, it's also important to note that August, in terms of humidity, is where we see higher humidity than any other month on average. Some of that spills into July ahead of it. Some of it spills into September after it. But as far as a solid month or the single month, August climatologically is our most humid month. But even that, we were beyond that. And if you're wondering, well, how often does the dew point temperature in Michigan go up to 70 or above? And it's not much. 5% of the time, something like that. That's what this graphic shows here. It actually shows there's some diurnal dependence too. It's much more likely to see those 70-degree dew points during the daytime hours and much less likely at night when the air temperature drops. But we had both of those happening last week. And so again, you can see some of the statistics here. 76 degrees. This is again from East Lansing. 83% was the average relative humidity. That's also amazing. Remember that during the day, we typically go down to less than 50%, 55% almost in terms of the leaf wetness of that time, that 6-day time frame going on, and 66 hours at 100% of the hour. These are unusual. This would not even be a little unusual on the Gulf Coast, but here again in Michigan, we saw that take place last week. For plant disease, this is obviously an issue. So that's something to keep an eye on. Some of these conditions are ideal for fungal pathogens, and we may get a comment on that here later on. So a very, very humid week. I started to spend some time on that, but it is one of those things that's sort of an oddity. If it seemed unusual, it's because it was truly unusual climatologically. In terms of dryness, the rainfall, as I mentioned, helped in many areas, but we still do have a number of spots in the state that really are lacking still or below normal for water for this time of the year for the first half of August, but it is better than it was a couple weeks ago in general. Degree day totals, the same pattern we've seen all season, and it reflected that weekly temperature pattern, minor deficits in far northern parts of the state, in the Upper Peninsula, maybe a few days behind. Two surpluses as you go south, especially along the Indiana and Ohio lines. In some cases now, those surpluses, and this is a seasonal value starting on the 1st of May, but some of those we're up about 200 units now. So at least a calendar week ahead of normal in the far southern part of the states, but the same spatial pattern that we've had before. Well, very, very straightforward forecast to talk about here this morning. We had another frontal boundary pass through the state late yesterday, and as we speak here, and you can see that now has just cleared the southern border of the state. There were a couple of isolated showers with that. You can see there's actually one down here in southeastern lower, but exception almost doesn't do it justice. Isolated is the word here. We may see a few more sprinkles at a couple spots, but basically high pressures moving in from the northwest. You can see that big blue H here over southwestern Ontario. That's our dominant weather feature here for the next couple days. And well, it's in Canada. It's of Canadian origin. So we're looking at a cool, dry type of weather pattern setting up. This is the first major piece of that cooler air. It's actually in the mid 40s in portions of the UP and the interior northern lower here this morning is just a reflection on how much cooler and drier that air is. But for the southeastern part of the state, which was the last to see that frontal passage, you'll notice winds will shift around to the north here today, and it will be noticeably less humid and cooler. High temperatures today only in the 70s across the state. Lows tonight, 40s north to 50 south, and that's where we're going to be for the next several days. Here's the weather map for tomorrow at 8 a.m. Again, high pressure firmly entrenched right over the middle of the Great Lakes region. Another sunny, fair, dry day. And then by Saturday, the next weather system approaches from the west. But most of the day, I think, will be should be fair and dry as well, with a few increasing clouds late. The next chance for any rain, any significant rain, and this is probably true for the entire upcoming week, will be most of the state overnight on Saturday and into Sunday with a chance for, we'll call it scattered showers. Many areas will pick up some rain, but it doesn't look like a major producer in terms of major amounts. The totals here in the gauge projected through next Thursday, in most cases, a quarter of an inch or less. So a drier than normal week is, I think, a very, very high likelihood or probability. And much of what you see here, again, would be falling over the latter part or the last half of the weekend, mostly Saturday night and on Sunday. After that or beyond that, it's looking, again, fair, dry, and cool. You can pick up a theme here in the forecast. And that could be the case for much of next week. And I'll show you here in the medium range, there's a consistency with that as well. Potential evapotranspiration transpiration rates. This is the reference value, again, that we use for irrigation management with the cool, dry forecast, a little bit below normal. And that's mainly because the cooler than normal temperatures. Most spots between 1.1 and 1.2 inches, which is a few hundredths of an inch below what we would typically see during the second week of August. So a little bit less than normal. Into the medium range, more of a theme. There actually are some differences between the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 days. I'll mention that in a second, but the theme is here. It's important to look at the upper air, the jet stream forecast pattern here, because it's sort of where we're going right now. But as we've seen all summer, the location of this big ridge that's been parked over portions of North America, and we've had the heat dome with that and all sorts of heat warnings and advisories associated with that. The axis of that is so important. Where's that anomalous weather or strange weather going to set up? The guidance is strongly suggesting it's going to be further west. So we're probably, with this particular forecast here, you can see for the 16th through the 20th, setting up over the western part of North America, probably looking at the development of a heat wave in places like the Pacific Northwest, maybe California, but it's certainly the Northwest and then up in British Columbia. But notice here over Eastern North America, a big trough. Northwesterly flow aloft. So that means the air mass that's on its way here for the state for the next few days, it's not the last one. There'll be at least one, maybe two more. And as a result of that, we're looking at a fairly strong likelihood of cooler than normal mean temperatures here for at least the next week and probably longer. At the same time, with northwesterly flow aloft, and with a frontal boundary, sort of a stationary frontal boundary expected to set up over portions of the southern U.S. to our south, that's going to limit moisture transport north out of the Gulf of Mexico. Most of the rainfall is going to be to our south, and we probably will end up on the drier side as well. That's the other theme. 8 to 14 days is similar to this, but there's some hints, and it does suggest that by the third week in the month or at the end of that, maybe we'll see a de-amplification, and I'll believe that when I see it, of the jet stream, because it's been amplified for much of the season. But maybe a change or transition into a different pattern here by late in the month. But for the next 1 to 2 weeks, most of it is pointing in that cool and drier than normal direction. And so, summarizing here, once again, cool, dry is where most of the forecasts are taking us. Next chance for anything significant coming late in the weekend, overnight Saturday and Sunday for precip, but temperatures a few degrees below the climatological normals where they typically are, and that's I think a fairly strong bet. But very pleasant to be outdoors and outside. In those areas, though, that need water, this is still, again, a continuing concern because we're not looking for much, or certainly below normal precip totals this week. And as you just saw, probably into the medium range time frame as well. And with that, I'll shift gears and introduce our next week's virtual breakfast speaker, and that's Dr. Matt Gammons, who's an agricultural economist. And Matt's going to be talking about carbon market updates, something that's changing rapidly here. And he very, very skilled and keeps up on this topic. So don't miss next Thursday morning's virtual breakfast. And with that, I'll stop and turn it back over to Sarah and/or Phil.